to someone else. When was that? When you poured it into the pot, the milk and meat in the pot, before you turned on the fire. At that point, it was prohibited to eat, rabbinically prohibited to eat. It was considered a mixture, but it wasn't prohibited to give to someone else until it's cooked together. Because the real prohibition of milk and meat is only after it's cooked together. But just milk and meat that's put together, you can't eat it, but you can still give it to someone else. It needs to be cooked together for it to get the prohibition of hana, that you can't have benefit from it.
So you can mix it without cooking.
Well, actually, we're not allowed to mix it.
Yeah,
we're not allowed to mix it. But if someone mixed it, or if there is a mixture already, you would be allowed to give it to an animal to eat, or until it's cooked. If it's cooked, not. So what Reb Shimon is saying, that because this type of food that's prohibited to eat had at one moment in time, it had a moment that it was permitted to give to someone else, to a non-Jew, or to an animal. It had a moment that you could have some benefit from it. So at that moment it was considered food, and it doesn't lose that status even after it's cooked. So all of the things that we mentioned before never had a single moment that it would be permitted. My time at the Reb Shimon. Rabbi says in the name of Rabbi Yechon, what's the reason for Reb Shimon? Again, we're going back because Rabbi says he heard that pigel of a korban mincha is not considered food according to Reb Shimon. So, and we have a Mishnah that seems to prove that, right? Because all of these things are not considered food. He says, from all food that you will eat, if water comes on it, it becomes impure. Okay? When it says it's coming to tell me that food that you can feed to another, to someone else, that's considered food. If it's food that cannot be fed to someone else, even because of a prohibition, it's not considered food. It says pigel and pigel you can't feed to someone else. So pigel is not considered food. So that's why it won't become tamei. Now the rule is, just in this context to get the full picture, that food needs to be a certain size for it to become tamei, or at least to contract tumah, that it could give tumah to something else. That's the size of an egg. There is such a thing as a dead animal, a nevela, which is tamei, but that's tamei at the size of a kazayas. So what we're talking here is that that all of these things cannot be tamei less than it's the size of an egg, less than the size of an egg.
I think as long as it's a whole, it's kosher. Even if it's less than kazayas.
Oh, that could
even
be
a whole bone if it's less than kazayas.
Okay. So now you're talking about the actual tumah itself,
right?
Not susceptible to, not contracting tumah. If you have a whole bone, that gives off tumah,
right?
But the recipient of tumah, the oichel, the food that bone touches, needs to be the size of an egg. In order for it, it's machlekes Rashi and the Rambam, I think. In order for it to be able, definitely in order for it to be able to pass tumah on to something else. And then regarding if it receives tumah itself, that's machlekes, if it's less than the size of an egg. Okay. The Gemara asks, okay, so we got the logic here for Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon's opinion is because if you can't feed it to someone else, then it's not considered food. Ihachi, if so, basar b'chalav nami tepiklei da'ochel shati yachal achil la'achirmu. Reb Shimon said that there's an exception of food that's prohibited, that it still becomes tamei. What's the exception? Milk and meat. Why? The exception was because it had a moment that it was permissible to feed to someone else, because it had a shas hechsher, shas kaiser, it calls it. The Gemara asks that when you add in a little bit of information here, a little bit of knowledge, we have a strong question, because Reb Shimon has a unique opinion. The Tanya. taught in a Braisa. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Aimer Mishum Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Reb Shimon, Vasa b'chala vasa b'achila mutar ba'ana. He has a different opinion than everyone else.
Shimon ben Yehuda and the name of Shimon, there's two Reb Shimons?
Yeah. I'm not sure who Reb Shimon ben Yehuda is, but I don't know. I think usually if it's a Rabbi Yehuda, it would say Reb Shimon ben Rabbi Yehuda. So, but he says in the name of Reb Shimon, and it means that he didn't hear it from Reb Shimon directly. But he says in his name that basar b'chalav you're not allowed to eat, but you're allowed to have benefit from. Shenemar kiyam kadishat l'Hashem alekecha le'savashel gedi b'chalivima. It says that you're a holy nation to God. Don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. Further on it says, you are holy to me. Don't eat the meat that's torn in the field. Just like meat that's torn. It means not kosher meat. What do you do with it? It's asur b'achila, but you're allowed to give it to a non-Jew. Right?
So what does that consider?
So afkan, asur b'achila, mutar ba'ana, also basar b'chalav. You're not allowed to eat it, but you're allowed to give it to someone else.
So that's called shas kosher.
No. That's called you're allowed to feed it to someone. So why did Reb Shimon tell me that? What's the reason why we have an exception of a certain type of food that could become tamei, even though it's asur to eat? What's the exception? Milk and meat, because at a certain moment in time it was permissible. Reb Shimon doesn't need that. According to Reb Shimon, there's a reason why basar b'chalav should be become tamei.
Oichel shata echol achil acherim is to a Jew. A goy is not a
Oh,
cherim.
well, we're adding here that even la'acherim.
A
that's
goy
right.
is like amadoim l'chamor.
No.
Smeichel kelev.
Uh-huh. The Gemara is not learning like that. We're considering it that if it's asur b'hana, you see, let's say, for example, all of the things that we...
If what I'm saying is wrong, you have to
No.
explain. Okay?
All of the things that we said are asur b'hana. Something that's asur b'hana, are you allowed to feed it to a non-Jew? You follow? It's asur b'hana.
If it's also banal, you
can't give it to anyone.
anybody.
Okay. So now, what's the reason why these things are not considered food?
Because they're also banal.
Because they're asur b'hana, you can't feed it to anyone. So
But
they're
I
not
would think-
considered food.
I would think on a korban, it's not necessarily asur banal. You can give it to another Jew.
So one second, before we jump to that. Reb Shimon said that we have an exception here, something that's prohibited to eat, but it still is susceptible to tumah. It's still considered food, even though it's forbidden to eat. And he said that's milk and meat. Why? Because at one moment in time it was permissible. The Gemara is now asking, Reb Shimon doesn't need to say because in one moment in time it was considered food. There's a much bigger reason why milk and meat is susceptible to tumah. Because Reb Shimon holds that you're allowed to feed it to a non-Jew. Everyone else disagrees with him. But if Reb Shimon's opinion is that milk and meat you're allowed to feed to a non-Jew, so why does he have to tell me that it's because at one moment in time it was susceptible, it was considered food because you could have fed it to a non-Jew even after it was prohibited? It's always allowed to be fed to a non-Jew, even after it's cooked. Reb Shimon holds that. That's the Gemara's tepaklei. Tepaklei means we could have derived this from a much bigger source than the one that you chose. So the Gemara answers, Chadavayit Kamar. You're right. He's saying this, and he's saying also this. In other words, he was adding to what you're saying, even though. First of all, he was giving two reasons. First of all, you can feed it to someone else. Even to himself, it had a time that it was permissible. Now, the time that it was permissible. Yeah, this is, in other words, based on Rabbi Yochanan's explanation for Reb Shimon.
Go down that chain.
So we had a problem with it because we have a better reason. We say no, Rabbi Yochanan's are adding a reason. The only thing that's a little bit unclear is what does this mean at the end, that even for himself he could have eaten it. You can't eat milk and meat that's being soaked together, even before you turn on the fire. And maybe what it means is that that before it was milk and meat together, it was permissible. Before you mixed it together, it was permissible. Rashi doesn't say that, but that would be an explanation. Okay. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. Reb Shimon says, Yesh Neiser Shu Metame Tumasaychlin, V'yesh Neiser Shein Metame Tumasaychlin. Food that's left over from a sacrifice. Sometimes it could be tamei, sometimes it's not tamei. Ketzad. What would be a case when it's not tamei? Lan lifnei zrika. Let's say the blood of the sacrifice was never sprinkled, and it was already mincha time, and it became dark, and the blood wasn't sprinkled yet. And so if the blood's not sprinkled, it becomes too late. Then when the food gets left over till the morning, it has to be burned. So you never had a moment for this to be edible, right? This food was always forbidden. So this is Reb Shimon saying that sometimes it's not going to be tummy to masaychle because this food was never permissible. So this is a case lan lifnei zrika, if it stayed overnight and the blood wasn't sprinkled, so eina metame to masaychle. La'achar zrika, but if it's after the blood was sprinkled, metame to masaychle. It does become impure. Why? Because the blood was sprinkled. They should have eaten it, but you left it too long. So during that time, when you should have eaten it, until it was left too long, that was edible. So it's considered food. The problem is the Bais continues and it says upigel. However, if it's pigel, bein b'kadshei kadashim, bein b'kadshim kalim, eina metamet to masaychlin. Pigel is never susceptible to tumah. However, pigel b'mincha metamet to masaychlin. However, pigel on a mincha is metamet to masaychlin. It's a big problem. It's a direct contradiction. It's exactly the opposite. Rabbi says, I heard that Reb Shimon holds that pigel on a mincha is not considered food. We have a Bais that clearly says Reb Shimon holds pigel on a korban is not considered food. Pigel on a mincha is considered food, and it is susceptible. It's exactly the opposite. Pigel is when the service of the sacrifice is performed when the kohen is thinking that he's going to eat it out of the allotted time. It invalidates the sacrifice.
It's very interesting. He uses the word shamaiti.
Yeah.
He doesn't say it as Amar Rabbi, Amar Reb Shimon.
Right. Right.
Maybe there was a little
I know that Rabbi is somewhere else. Rabbi in Bava Basra uses that expression also. I think I forget where it is. Shamati mihal chiyusha. Amar Rabbi Shamati mihal chiyusha. It's a phrase that Rabbi uses.
It says trademark.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a clear contradiction. The Gemara says like kasha. The Gemara says not a question. How do we resolve this? Depends if it ever had a moment that it was permissible to eat. So you have a problem here. If I take grain and I sanctify it, I say this is going to be a mincha. Before I sanctified it, I could have eaten it. It's considered food. How could it ever not be ever edible? So the Gemara explains. You sanctified it before you harvested it. It was still growing. It was never a food. Which means that while it's growing, it doesn't become tamei. And before you even harvested it, it was already a sacrifice that couldn't be eaten.
Why couldn't it be eaten?
Because you can't eat the sacrifice yet.
No, but before it was mechuber l'karka.
It's not tamei. That's not considered food yet. Only after it's harvested. And you sanctified it before. Then after it was harvested, it was already a sacrifice. And then immediately when you're going to be allowed to eat it, it becomes pigel. The Gemara asks you should be allowed to redeem it. And that should be considered like a shasa kosher. What's this taking us back to?
Well, why?
It's a shmuel. Are you allowed to redeem something that's pure? If you're allowed to redeem it, then that should be considered that it's eligible to be food.
Yeah.
We had two opinions in Rabbi Shia, two versions. One opinion says that only if it's impure are you allowed to redeem it. But if it's pure, you're not allowed to redeem it. Shaper, then it makes sense. But according to the opinion that says you could redeem things that are pure, lifrikinu, let him redeem it.
And then it'll have a shas
and it will be
kosher.
shasa kosher. And what are you telling me that it never had a time to be eaten? I granted it doesn't have a time to be eaten, but you should be you redeem it and it will have a time to be eaten. It will be considered food. The Gemara answers, it says hashtem yalei parak, but you didn't redeem it yet, so it still never had a
In
time.
such a situation,
It's because you never redeemed it yet. It was never considered eligible to be food to be eaten. The Gemara says ukiven di bayu parak lei, but since you are able to redeem it, that should be enough. Shaminan leila Reb Shimon damar kalayim midliftes kapadi dami. You're gonna like this, right? Reb Shimon holds that anything that you could redeem is considered like you redeemed it. The Tanya was taught in the Bais. Reb Shimon Aimer para metametam asaychlin. A red heifer is considered food. Why? Hayol Bais l'shasa kosher, because it had a moment to be that it was eligible. When did it have a moment to be eligible? It says, let's go further. Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says that para niftas al gav marachta, because the para, after it was shechted, you put it on you're ready to burn it outside. And it was burnt outside the temple. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was burnt just for the service. But it could have been redeemed while it's on the fire. You could have redeemed it. So therefore it's considered food and it could actually become tummy. The Gemara says, Hachi hashta, hold it. Bishlaima parai medes liftesi. I understand by a paraduma it could be redeemed. Shimatza acheres naim and a mitzvah liftesi, because if you find a better one, it's a mitzvah to redeem it. You bring a better paraduma. Elahani menachos mitzvah lifteisan. But these menachos, is it a mitzvah to redeem it?
if you find better flour, no?
It doesn't. There's no. This is okay. I don't want to keep anyone from davening. Let's stop over here. It's in the middle, but we'll get back to it. Okay.
I still don't understand this part.